project, we provide some
Yeah, he can read that.
additional breakdown information that Nancy requested for city BOCES to use.
Okay.
So basically, as far as Corey and myself, we are in reaction mode. Whatever you guys need, we'll provide you the information daily for. Budget numbers and everything else is what they want. We've also been trying to work with Brody Smith, Nancy at Bond. I've been sending him the information I've been sending you, so hopefully that's been satisfying him. He hasn't been in touch with me about anything as far as that goes.
So we got the,
sure.
we got the financials and the breakdown so that we can overlay those on the videos. And Rebecca has those.
Yes. This is Craig Daly. He's our architect from King & King.
Yep.
And Corey's hiding
Corey,
right there.
you're
Corey is
supposed to up here. Corey.
I wasn't told to call
our
that.
You were just in the bathroom.
Paul Osborne.
I'm wondering, should we? Jim, thank you very much for coming. Right. Appreciate everything that you said earlier. Can we take time to address the questions?
I think so too,
Because
yeah.
I think, would you think we would do that or no?
Some of them I think are easy to answer,
Yeah,
and some of them aren't.
Okay.
And we would want to get them some more information.
right.
I wasn't expecting anything.
We didn't
by the way.
anticipate doing these, but
But no, I thought there, some of them were.
some of them are pretty easy to talk about. And there's a frequently asked questions portion that we worked on today that we're going to be addressing these to put out in the public domain, because we think a lot of the questions that you're asking here are pretty typical of what people are wondering about in the community, and they're the things that we're hearing about from the people that we talk to. If we let's jump to let's see number.
We can answer the first ones here, can't we? And one that thinks about reserve, that's.
Yeah, let's talk, all right, let's talk
Yeah.
about one. If you roll back to the first budget that we prepared 16-17, the 16-17 budget was in response to, and you've heard me say, you referenced it in your comments, in the 16-17 budget was coming off the heels of the New York State Comptroller's Office telling us that we had been designated as a district in risk of fiscal stress. And the reasoning for that designation was the continuous use of reserves and fund balance by the district that put us dangerously close to not having the reserves and fund balance that might have been necessary in a crisis. So we had that, coupled with a pilot structure with 9 Mile 1 and 2 that was decreasing in nature. And that was a pretty dramatic drop that year. So we had a dramatic drop in our revenues. We had an indication from the comptroller that we no longer should be using our reserves and fund balance to build our budgets. And so we created a budget at that point that righted the ship in terms of reducing our budget significantly, and that required some reductions by the board and instructional staff. At the same time as we were rebuilding those following years, the budget, now that we had reduced our budget smaller than the prior 2 years, we were able to not only start building really conservative budgets moving forward that were revenue based. So we were only building budgets for those first 2 years that were based on the actual revenues we had, with no use of reserves and fund balance. The reductions we made in staff, and also by rolling back our budget to at least 2 years in terms of size and scope, that allowed us to build revenue-based budgets and also start our spending practices that were more frugal. And so we had $1 million in our capital reserve fund at that point in 16-17. We had a capital reserve with $1 million in it. We started enhancing that capital reserve account at the same time that we were building budgets that were smaller than the prior years, rebuilding our instructional staff by bringing positions back from the 50-some that we reduced, and then using our budget surplus each year to continue to build our capital reserve to the point that we're at now. Understanding that there had been this capital project that had been in the planning stages for about 7 or 8 years at that point. by prior boards. And we knew that we were reducing pilot structure on our 9 mile 1 and 2 pilot, that we would need to rely heavily on our capital reserve account in order to offset the local share for a capital project that had been in the planning stages for years. So that was the purpose of continuing to build our capital reserve. So we had smaller budgets. We're starting to incrementally increase our instructional staff again to levels that we wanted. We were very purposeful in the things that we were adding back, and at the same time building our reserve. So we built our reserve from $1 million to $5.5 million now, and that $5.5 million, in addition to the recent increase in our building aid, is what allowed us to get from the 36, whatever it was, for this capital project in March to the point now where we can go for $1.15 on a $100,000 home.
And I think and again, just from being a person not involved in the board and then coming on the board, and there's so much information to learn, so I appreciate your questions because it is very confusing. Like, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, when I'm reading your questions, like, what the reserves are, and what the amounts are as part of your question. So like we don't just have one reserve, there's multiple reserve accounts. And so the capital project reserve, right? That can only be
Capital
used
reserve, yes.
for that's it. So when like Dean is saying, and what is it, the fund balance has to be, is it 4%?
4% of your budget.
Of our budget. So that is what by the state says, we have to have 4% of our budget in our fund balance. So at the end of the year, if we have more than the 4%, then we can take that money and we can reallocate it to the reserves of our choice. So like Dean just said, we took, anytime we had a surplus, we took that money over the 4%, we left the 4% in there in case of an emergency or some unforeseen. But then the rest of that, as a board, we'd say, okay, we want to take X number of, this million and put it over here, 500,000, put it over here into these different, and then that's where they stay.
We do
So
that based on Nancy's
based on,
recommendation.
right, so like she looks at, and then we, based on what the state recommends, so it's this whole, but that's how it comes down to us. And then, we make, but I think that that's something that obviously, and we don't expect the general population to understand all that. I mean, it takes years to wrap your brain around all of these numbers. But I think that, when I read that, I think that was one of the questions that you were asking.
Amy, the voters authorized
Yes.
the creation of the capital reserve to up to a certain amount, maybe 7 million,
$7
or whatever,
million.
like the cap, allowing the district to utilize those surplus funds to go into that area, primarily for this effect. So, because we know we're going to be doing capital projects that, to offset the local share by using the money surplus to do that.
And I do think that that is a concern. Again, I mean, we talked about it at our meeting last night, and we hear this question a lot. And I think that there's a general lack of understanding about that because people say, oh, they're using, $5 million from their reserves, and they're not,
It's a
and
purposeful
understandably
reserve.
so, they don't understand, and that's why I think it's, like I said earlier, it's important for us to explain,
That's right.
how all these things work, because it is very confusing,
And that's a good
so.
Q&A to.
And the capital project, under the capital reserve, it also can be used for an emergency in a building like an HVAC system or something like that as well. But to go to B for your question number 1, why increase reserve use from $2 million in last year's failed proposal to $5.5 million now? Because we have it and we are trying to offset the local share. We're trying to keep the cost to taxpayers low. That was the interest of the board, and so that's why we're building the reserve.
And actually, last year, we were going to utilize $4 million of the capital reserve, not 2. I don't know where that figure came from. It was always 4. And just as a correction, we're using $5.9 million of capital reserve for this program, not 5.5.
That's the number I took off the PowerPoint.
It was probably an early PowerPoint. The board had revised it after the fact.
December 25th.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So may I'm allowed to ask questions?
Sure.
Yeah, so if I may, So if I'm hearing right, when there is a surplus, you can designate which accounts they go into. And so because knowing that this capital project is something that was coming up, that's something that you decided to put it to, where it could have been put also to instructional accounts possibly, or other things like that?
Within that limit of the percent, I believe.
No, what happens in our world is that we're required to keep 4% of our next year's budget in an unassigned fund balance.
Right.
So that's what we get to keep in, as Amy said, for an emergency if something happens. If there's additional money at the end of the year, we can fund our reserves up to a certain amount. So it can only be used to fund reserves.
But isn't your fund balance, isn't one of the reserves that 4% you keep in?
No,
No?
no,
So
it's
that
not a reserve.
Okay, so when the audit talked about $12 million and you were keeping it at $14 million, you can't save extra money in things that are not capital?
Well, we have different reserves.
You can
We
put
have
money in
an,
other reserves as well.
we
Okay.
have an unemployment reserve because we are self-insured.
Right.
We have a reserve, our capital reserve. We have a reserve for ERS, our employees' retirement system. We have a reserve for tax certiorari's claims. We have a reserve for, I think, post-employment obligations. So we do have other reserves. We also have a nuclear stabilization reserve, which is not funded.
So the process that we go through is when we sit down and we go through it, Nancy suggests what limits and ranges we should be in within each. She suggests where we should and what we should move it into. And that's basically this year how we got to the point of, and we had some discussion around certain areas and certain reserves where we didn't necessarily want to move it into this one, or we moved it into the other one. And the capital project was, I don't want to say was the highest topic, but it was more so balancing, right? Because we had to balance based on some limits that we had to adhere to as well. So it wasn't as just, we had all this extra money over the course of a few years over the 4%, over that 4% that we're just going to apply to that capital project. It got moved around.
So if I may, one more thing. So it's 5.9 million. And is that all of it? You said there's a cap of 7 million.
No, there's
Is
about
that-
$75,000 left in that reserve. Half
Okay,
is
so
used to
after the
5.9.
5.9, there'll be about 75K left
Yes,
In that reserve.
in the capital reserve.
Yep,
Yes.
capital reserve.
Which can only be used in a capital project.
Which may be an HVAC if something goes fluid.
and at some point, we're going to reach our cap of 7 million. I think we're almost there now. I think we're at 6.8, 6.9, so the board is actually going to have to reauthorize a new capital reserve limit. And that has to be voted on.
So now, and then say, because you asked the question too, if we have more than the 4% in the fund balance, can that go back to balance the budget for, not the capital, but to go towards instructional and stuff like that?
I'm a teacher. I always go to education. I always go to that aspect of offering things. So yeah, that's what I was wondering, because things come up. You get a new contract, health insurance. We don't get this country under wraps. That keeps rising. And you have these costs that it's difficult for me to predict and see 12 years out, thinking 12 years ago. So I know everybody's doing their due diligence, but it's just a difficult thing to think about.
Yeah.
We are self-insured for our health insurance. We have a health insurance committee that was meeting monthly, that is very cognizant of the cost of our health insurance plan. And they've managed it very well, at least for the last 3 years. We've seen some savings in our health insurance, where other school districts have seen 5 to 10% increases. So it's something we look at.
Let's go to number 2. You said it was reported the project will take until 2031 to complete. Should constituents expect that no new capital improvement needs will arise over the next 12 years? I would say no to that, certainly. And B, how our projections may determine what needs will exist in the district. This project, as well as any capital project in any district, is largely driven by your building condition survey, which is something we're required to have and submit to state ed. And typically what districts do is they look at the priority items in your building condition survey in order to determine the highest need. That's why sometimes when people say, well, how did the locker room at the high school, how did it get like this? Well, because over time, as we did other capital projects, those priority items start to rise to the top. Craig, you can jump in if I'm incorrect.
No,
But that's how we determine the priority needs, is largely driven by our building condition survey that's conducted by your architect and submitted to state ed. So we'll always be reaching out to that building condition survey regularly to identify what are the next high priority needs after we've taken care of this large block at the top right now that's built into this particular capital project.
So then
And
I would assume that probably within the next 12 years, other things are gonna
Sure,
come up that
sure.
are not
Just a
captured.
rotation.
That are not captured within the capital project.
Yes.
That's what some of the other stuff we plan for in the background,
Mhm.
to make sure that we have the funds to be able to account for the other things that are going wrong, so.
And we will continue to enhance our capital reserve account even after we use capital reserves to the 5.9 point on this capital project. That's something that's ongoing. What is also ongoing is conversations around our building condition survey with our architects and our engineers, as well as fiscal advisors who help us balance our debt fall off, our debt service fall off with the building condition survey and all of those other financial elements in order to help guide us to make the great decisions on what's affordable for us now. And that will continue.
And it's a great question, right?
Yeah.
Because when you roll this out, people think over 12 years, well, it's gonna fix everything that comes up in the next 12 years. The reality of that is no. Is it gonna fix a lot of the stuff that's, I guess,
Yeah.
gone wrong or is going wrong? Yes, but it's not the end-all, fix-all in the next 12 years.
Right.
And you're gonna have a brand new set, 5, 6, 7 brand new schools. That's not the reality.
We did a pretty big capital project in 2010 to put all our single points of entry in 6 of the 7 schools. That was a pretty big project. It did a lot of interior enhancements, but all the things that you see in the 2019 capital project weren't in that project. And you look at it now and you wonder why? Because there were greater needs then than there are 8 years later. Another great example of that question to Brandon's point is, in this capital project, there are multi-million dollars that are being dedicated to the roof systems at Kingsford Park and Fitchie Park, because they're sister schools. But in 12 years, Layton may need a roof, because it's ongoing.
We're also
We
able
think it's
to,
responsible.
we're also able to take the guidance from these two gentlemen over here who have done this how many times in different districts? I mean, a lot, I'm sure. So we're able to rely on that. Then Nancy's giving us projections and figures to the best of her ability, and we rely heavily on her because she's always giving us trends and such which are happening. She must watch a lot of CNN because she sees a lot of things. Then you hear about it later and you're like, wow, it's interesting, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's not CNN, I take that back, yeah.
Yeah.
So the building condition survey,
Sorry.
the building condition survey is a very comprehensive tool that the state mandates we do it. So it goes out, some of the items that are on those things may go out 25 years as far as like planning and looking at scoping. So it is a long range, even though we do it every 5 years. The intent of every 5 years is to make sure we're updating and say, well, that system we thought was 25 years, looks like it's got more wear and tear, maybe there's 10 years left on it, those types of things. We did the 2010, and then we did the 2012, which took into almost every roof in the district, with the exception of the 2 schools that are proposed now. All the new roof systems are 30-year roofs. Typically, in the past, they've been either 15 or 12-year systems. So that cycle, we were able to jumpstart and get ahead of that on those types of things. So there's a lot of planning. But to your point, the lead water thing came out as a mandate that was not part of that consideration in the future. So there's no control as far as that. The carbon monoxides, they said when that initially came out, that the residential styles were acceptable. And then they changed the rule to say, well, you can have a 10-year battery. Well, the current rule is they mean for any capital project you do, that you update them so they're addressable, kind of like the fire alarm strobes in the rooms. So that Dave Crisafulli knows that there's a CO monitor going off. He knows it's in chemistry room 204 versus it's in the high school, you know, those types of things. So a lot of those things, yeah, they're those unfunded state mandates, but fortunately they're able to support them through a capital project to offset the majority of the cost of those things instead of a dollar for dollar from the district. So that helps it all to understand that there is a lot of long-range planning that goes into this.
I think in response to your 2C2, it's important to note, and thank you for bringing this up. If changes occur in building needs, student populations, and make other projects more pressing than others, right? So, to your point, we watch the trends. There's people that spend a lot of trends on the population of the school districts, whether they're decreasing or they're increasing. We hope that they increase, right? But if they don't, then we as a district have to make the decisions on those types of things, which will also incur expenses and costs that go along with that as well, that's not necessarily wrapped up into this big picture as well, so.
Right, and that was one of the points that we did in the analysis of selling the education center that the superintendent has just sold, was looking at what was the need for that building, was there a future need for that building, or could we downsize and move into the schools, which is what we did. So there was a lot of legwork to that whole entire transition that was done behind the scenes that people never know of.
I think the simple answer to number 3 is there was quite a bit of conversation from the board, not only in the previous attempt at this capital project, but certainly moving forward. It simply was a decision by the board to go out with one capital project that was comprehensive, that not only included a lot of building work, which is about 95% of this project is building work, and also the necessary site work that is adjoined to those buildings, inside facility work and outside facility work. And a large part of that outside site work, it's not all about athletic fields, but it's about some pretty comprehensive work on Buck Boulevard, draining, the Liberty Street parking lot at the high school, the back driveway at Minetto Elementary School, sidewalks, and the list goes on and on and on. And it's necessary to get that done. And that coupled with the fact that every time we go out for a capital project vote, there's a cost. And every time we delay a capital project, there's escalating costs. So the board just decided, let's go all in on this, and let's do it and promote it very aggressively. And
I just recently came on and I was of the mindset that you were. Let's separate this out, because a lot of people were looking at it just athletics, and that's what was taking everything down. They weren't looking at everything that was happening with the buildings. And I said, let's give it to the voters, because if you want to take that and say, all right, they don't want to incur that, but we have to have this other stuff done. But when I saw 2 things that changed my mind relative to it. Once was the increase in aid, when all of a sudden we went from 62 to 87%, and made it so dramatic that cost was minimized for the taxpayer. I went, okay, I was still concerned, I still thought we could break it out. But the other part of it was that I looked at it and I said, that this plays, doing the athletic portion plays an integral part, and I found out more from talking to people that use that aspect of it. And not just for football or not just for athletics, but for band, for all the other educational aspects of it as well, that it can be utilized in that aspect. And if those aspects keep retention and keep a kid here, I was much more supportive of it. And I looked at it and I said the aid is so significant that we might as well do it, because we won't get this out. Oh, the other part I wanted to say was, since the initial part, when we looked at this last year, it was 60.1, the original project was $60.19 million. In the year since that, it turned into 62.5. So 2.31 million increase, the same project, all right? Now we're at a different point, so we're higher than that. But I looked at that and I said, if that cost is increasing that dramatically, we can't afford to miss this opportunity. And if we wait, it's going to cost us even more down the line. So that's how I looked at it. I thought it's like buying that car or something when the interest rate is so low, it's like, all right, we're at an opportunity right here and we should take it. That was just me. Yeah.
And to number 4, I guess we can answer all of these. There are some fiscal reasons and financing reasons, bonding reasons why you see that we are combining some athletic field projects on the OHS Layton campus, and we will be providing itemized number by number dollar amounts on each component of this, but it has to do with bonding and building aid, the access of building aid when site work is on the site of a particular school. Is that correct, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, it has to do with what, typically SED saw this as 2 separate campuses. They saw it as a high school, and they saw it as an elementary school. And we were able to convince them that Buck Boulevard is actually district property, district maintained, district taken care of, so they can see that as a whole campus. So the reason the fields on this campus are shared between those 2 facilities is to maximize the aid we can get. Without trying to kill you with numbers, SED, you know how they figure, your regular state aid is figured based on the number of kids you have, building aid units, and they have so much they budget per kid, and that's kind of the aid that the district gets. They have the same side on the building aid unit. So based on your population, they have a calculation that they come up with for the high school population, the Layton population, and for each of the buildings. And it's called the maximum cost allowance. And that's kind of why we had to phase this out, is because the phase 3 and phase 4 is primarily on this campus. The value of the site redevelopment, drainage, all the work for the whole campus exceeds the maximum cost allowance unless we keep it in those separate phases that recoup every 5 years. So it's like your grandfather's going to give you $1 million, but I'm only going to give it to you every 5 years. So you're trying to maximize that $1 million within that time frame until you get the next check and next check. So that's kind of why we had to stretch this out. If the district were to do all that work in one phase, it would be possible, but the impact would be dramatic locally versus $1.50.
What is the ability to fund if you do it as 2 or 3 different proposals? Would the state aid still be there?
Well, the state aid is going to be whatever
I mean, that's the main
we
that's the main thing we're
secure.
talking about.
The state aid is going to be what we secure at this point of when the voters approve it. When we start submitting the projects and things like that, they're looking at the current state aid. You were at 62, 62.5.
Yeah, up to
And were
87.
recently updated because they realized that they had miscalculations as far as the wealth of the district. Some of the pilot programs and agreements and things made you look wealthy. So right now they corrected that. That could go up over the next 3-5 years, 10 years. It could go back down a little bit, it could fluctuate. So if we secure this project with the voters' permission, approval, we'll be able to secure hopefully that percentage. And our financial model also is conservative enough to equate for minor ups and downs. If it drops back down to 62.5, that might mean we have to scale back what we do in order not to exceed that authorization that the voters give us.
The idea is if there were 2 or 3 different proposals approved by the voters, if the state aid funding was at the same percentage at the time of approval, then it would still be a wash. It would be equal. As long as the state aid monies don't go down
And
2
provided-
years from now.
and provided
if that's when the
voters-
vote happens.
Providing the voters' approval.
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's why I said, if the voters approve 2 different or 3 different projects, if state aid was exactly the same, we would have the same exact dollar amount.
But the modeling of the campus, which is required in that phase 3 and that phase 4, if the voters for some reason said, no, we're not going to go for phase 3, we approve phase 4, there's pieces that are interlocking, so all of a sudden you don't have a complete Buck Boulevard, but you have a tennis court. Or, so it's a purpose to keep it packaged as one package to the voters, presented with that, knowing that the phasing is only being suggested to maximize the aid on this project. So it's just the way we've tried to finance, so we we're minimizing those.
Good question.
Yeah, great.
These are great, I'm gonna use these if you don't mind. Because I think they're relevant to any capital project the city
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
Hear them over and over. Same question. So what else?
Any other?
Any other questions?
Anyone?
This is your time.
Jen, did you see your ceiling in the video? Yeah. So tomorrow we start filming the student-led videos, starting at Canetta. Rebecca and her crew are starting to produce our smaller school-based videos. We'll have those.
And they're gonna be quick like this one here, like a.
Quicker,
They
probably.
they will
Yeah.
be
Much
much.
That one was
quicker.
just under 2 minutes.
Okay,
The others, we think, about 40 seconds.
oh, perfect.
Real quick.
Yeah, around 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So those are exciting. I was so excited to see the first one. You don't know.
Yeah, they came out great.
Yeah. Rebecca shared one that they produced for Hannibal's capital projects for me a week or so ago. And I was like, okay, this is good work. So I really appreciate that. Rebecca's been great. We've spent a lot of time together. A couple hours today. We're meeting again on Thursday to continue to roll out our plan. We worked today on talking points, many of which are those. We have a calendar that we're creating, actually two separate calendars. One is the release. I'm going to be putting 7 editorials five editorials to the Pal Times that will run on 5 consecutive Mondays. I'll submit the editorials on a Friday. They'll be published on Mondays in the Pal Times that are written, that focus on those Jim's types of questions that we generated. And that's why I was so surprised when you passed out your letter, because so many of these questions are questions that we know people want to know. Number 1, number 3.
So, mainly you, Jim, where do you think, and I ask this as a person with questions,
Yeah.
where would you think is the best place to access it? The easiest way the common person can get answers, and not at something like this, like earlier you said, can you put the video in a specific place, I think, did you say?
I just mentioned your upfront webpage. I mean, to actually get to Dr. Bui's PowerPoint from September 25th, I had remembered Ms. Squires had maybe given an hour-long presentation at a meeting, and I had read that in either the Pal Times or something like that. The ability for somebody to have the time, or some voters the wherewithal, to go through each of the links to know in your agenda where to click, and it's not the easiest thing in the planet.
That's
So,
the concern we have, that's what we
Yeah.
you know, so up front on the webpage, social media is a place where people get a lot of information from. I'm not part of Facebook, but you know, I read the paper still. But a lot of people do. And so those kinds of things would be spectacular.
I think those are things we need to hear, because, we've talked about it before, how can the general public access the information, get accurate information, and what is it they say, what's the average somebody's gonna watch something? You're saying 30 seconds, great, everybody's got 30 seconds, but if you got an hour-long video, somebody's like,
Right.
Yeah.
it's just,
They have to be impactful, quick, in and out, and give all the most important information up front.
I think he brings up a good point too. It's got to be easy that if somebody says, I'm
Yeah.
looking to find out when the vote is, or where the vote is, or what's the vote, then I can just click in and be like, there it is.
Easy to
Yeah,
navigate.
just go to school district, bam, right on the front page, it's
Right.
right
How
there,
about
and you don't
even
have
like
to.
with the Palladium Times, they have the survey, are you sponsoring, are you in favor of the capital project?
Right.
Maybe there's an opportunity where you could put updates in that spot or adjacent to that spot, so it's not just people voting, but right next to it or near it, somebody's gonna get the information they really need.
The Pal
I
Times
also
is
know
committed
Oswego
to really
Daily
help us. Yeah.
News has like a G-Ray Bodley kind of section to it, where people can get information about what's going on in the Fulton
Yeah.
School District. Maybe we should tap into that and have an
Yeah.
Oswego section for
great
the
idea.
capital project as well.
Yeah.
If media is where people are getting their information from.
Yeah. So your point is well taken, and something we've talked about even today, and that is to have a really bold spot right on the main page for capital project, all the information that you need. That will be a warehouse, so to speak, of all the videos that are produced, all the information, the flyers that will be sent out even before they're sent, so they're accessible right there. The informational flyer, last time we did a 4-page flyer, we think it was too much.
It was too.
This year it's gonna be, it'll be a front and back, followed by a postcard reminder to vote, as well as 2 automated messages, one on the 17th in the evening and one on the 18th midday, to remind voters, because people get caught up in their day, and then they're like, oh my God, it's 8:30, you know, we still haven't had dinner, but I have to vote.
Right.
Or it's 9:15, oh my God.
Right.
So, a lot of reminders, a lot of easier to understand information sharing, things like that.
The other thing I
And
was
a
gonna-
connection, I'm sorry,
Oh, good.
an easier connection between our website and our Facebook.
But you coming here tonight is the most valuable aspect of it, in the sense that it's person to person. We talked about this last night too, because it's you coming, taking the time to come and ask the questions, get the information, so that you can go talk to other people with the information that you have. And that's really so much of it. I was watching Donnie Deutsch the other day, and he was just talking about, he goes, good advertising is word of mouth. That ultimately comes down to that. Who do you know? Who you just, so if I talk to you and that being top of mind, that you're willing to say to someone, yeah, I found out this about that project last night. I found out that. So, I mean, that the onus comes back to us to communicate that.
And I still would love to meet with you if you want to ask more questions. And we can provide data too that maybe is helpful to understand some of the questions that will maybe support what we shared with you.
Anybody have anything else?
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you all for
Thank you very
coming.
much.